Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Coffee and Clarks. I'm your co-host, Javian Brabham.
And I'm your other co-host, Tyler Duncan.
And today, as you can tell, we have a very special guest with us. This is Jean Laurenz. She is the Assistant Professor of Trumpet at University of Wisconsin-Madison. And she is certainly an electric musician. She's very versatile in what she does. She's had a fantastic career. She's played with Adele, the Hanson Brothers, the Boston Pops, the Hong Kong Philharmonic. She's been in multiple chamber ensembles like Assistant Brass, the Knights, a Far Cry, so many different ensembles and performance opportunities that she's had. So she's here to talk about her career and what she's done and how she got to where she is. Jean, welcome to the show. Special thank you for joining us. Appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited for this.
Awesome, great. But before we go into questions that we have for you, Tyler and I, we talk about coffee all the time because we value it. Clearly, it's in the title of the show. So I don't know if you're a coffee drinker. Are you a coffee drinker? And if so, are you drinking anything, or what are you drinking if you are drinking coffee?
Yeah, I am a coffee drinker. It is the reason for getting up in the morning. I am such a passionate coffee. I wouldn't call myself a connoisseur because I haven't done that deep of a dive, but I care deeply about how I brew my coffee and the quality of the coffee. But I do find actually the way it's brewed matters more than the beans that are going into it.
Yeah,
you know, I'm sure there are people rolling their eyes at me, but that's where I'm at in terms of my deep dive of coffee. And I do AeroPress. I don't know if you do either of you do AeroPress.
We've talked about that. Yeah.
I think I'm a lifelong AeroPresser. And I basically I make like a pseudo espresso in my AeroPress and then dilute it with whole milk. I'm not a sugar person, but I can't drink coffee black, and I know that again puts me outside of the connoisseur circle. What about you guys?
Tyler?
So I just got a new bag last week from Swings Coffee. They have a couple different locations, but their roastery is located in Alexandria, Virginia. And so this bag is from Guatemala, and some of the flavor notes actually have it with me. White grape, chocolate, and light citrus. And it's, again, more on like the light roast, which is kind of where I go to because it's a little bit more sweeter. And my brewing method mostly actually has been on the Chemex right now. So I don't know if I've tried this bag on the V60, but I should do that. I should buy an AeroPress and then have that, the V60 Chemex, and then I have a French press and do like a tasting to see.
Oh yeah, we should do that.
That'd be fun. We should go live and do that. That'd be fun.
Yeah, that would be fun. Hey, ideas. There it is.
Yeah.
So I had to run some errands this morning, so I actually went to my local coffee shop and got my coffee because I didn't have time to make it at home. So my local coffee shop here in town, they, as you all know, well, Tyler knows and our listeners know, so they carry Perks Coffee, which is out of Savannah, Georgia. So this is I got a pour over there, and they do it on a V60. So it's their Ethiopian dynamic and floral. Single origin, has peach and jasmine tasting notes. So they brewed it for me today. They know me by first name. I actually got it for free because that's how many times I've been there. You got to work up to the free. So that's what I'm drinking today. It's delicious, very light, not too heavy. It is black. You know, I'm one of the no cream guides out there. No shade to anybody who has cream in their coffee.
I also feel like I should jump in and make sure that I share. I forgot to share. I drink Collectivo and Just Coffee. I want to promote the Wisconsin
Okay.
roasteries. And then I also really, it's in Arkansas, but I love Onyx coffee as well.
Oh yeah, I've had Onyx before.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
Okay.
good. So
All right.
nice.
I'll have to try that. I haven't had those. Okay. Awesome.
Nice.
Well, that's our coffee talk for today. Good stuff. Good.
Yeah. So, Gene, how did you get your start in music, and what led you to want to pursue music in college?
It's so funny because I feel like I I just never stopped doing music. It wasn't really a strong decision, or there was no like music, there were musical turning points in my life, but it's funny, I feel like I'm here because I just never stopped. It wasn't so conscious, but I do have very early memories of absolutely loving music. For all of you band directors out there, thank you, because I remember being a kindergartner or first grader, and the high school band came, and then we were sitting on the floor, um, and I sat right in front of the bass drum, and I'll never forget the sensation of being literally vibrated by the bass drum. And I went home. I was like, "Mom, the music rumbled my heart." And I think she thought I was being poetic, but I was like, no, like literally, like I was shaking. And I just those very formative early memories allowed me to get really excited about band and orchestra. And then I had a big burst in high school where I was like, well, what would happen if I just practiced a lot? And that was inspired by a few goals, but also by a few people saying, oh, you'll never be able to play that. And I was like, what if I tried though?
Yeah, yeah.
So it was a little bit of a internal competitive grit thing mixed in with a very natural love of music and sound, and especially soprano sounds. And so there was that. And then I had a lot of opportunity and to exit the field. Actually, I experienced a few things that I think most people would have found the earliest exit and taken it. But the fact that I'm here at all makes me realize I must really, really love it, because I just kind of kept doing it, and I just told myself I'd keep doing it until it stopped working, and it just kept working. So.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you to all the band directors out there. I think,
Yeah.
I'm sure I can speak for Tyler in this. Like, there's always that one teacher that kind of inspires you to kind of take that next step, or your friends who are in the band with you to kind of, that little motivation among friends kind of helps tell you to take that next step in your playing. I know for me, like, I'm from a small town, so we didn't have like an orchestra nearby or private teacher. So like everything was, self-isolated. So it was all about like these 5 or 6 people were all like pushing each other to be better musicians, and that kind of forced us to practice, and through friendly competition, that's kind of like how we all got better. So it's definitely true. Awesome.
Yeah.
What was it like? Because we both, Tyler and I know, maybe some people don't know that you're a trumpet player as well as a vocalist. So what was it like majoring in trumpet performance and choral education? And how did those focus overlap in your influence in your studies?
First of all, so much. It's teaching how the voice works and the entire pedagogy of the singing world makes its way into my lessons daily. I went to Northwestern, and I really wanted to find a school that would allow me to be active in both trumpet and voice. Not because at the time I saw the overlap, but because I just truly loved both. And I actually think I was maybe slightly more drawn to the voice, but there's a color that the trumpet can get that is unmatched. And I think I was more drawn to the expressive nature of singing because of the layer of the text and of the extreme vowel shapes and different sounds and styles that I knew how to make at that time that I've always tried to emulate on the trumpet. So I actually auditioned for colleges in vocal jazz and in classical trumpet performance. And Northwestern seemed like the best fit because I could obviously study with really amazing teachers and can pursue the trumpet, but they also allowed me to major in choral music ed, whereas a lot of schools don't allow for that cross-pollination. Right. And as I was taking voice lessons and trumpet lessons, I realized there was an epiphany that came maybe my sophomore or junior year in college, where I was like, my trumpet range, now I'm a soprano voice, my trumpet range is identical to my voice range. And I was able to, in my trumpet playing, expand my range, a major second within a semester. And then I found that manifested in my voice too. I was like, whoa. And then I pushed my vocals and was able to increase my range there and smooth out the breaks that naturally exist in the voice. And I realized that was happening in my trumpet playing as well, like that awful transition from low C to C sharp. There's that little break there. And then there's also going from in the staff, the C to D, the like ever loved flat partial, fifth and sixth partial. Yeah, and I realized that how much my singing was impacting in a positive way those natural breaks in the trumpet. So I started by realizing pedagogically how beneficial studying both were, and then as I get older and more experienced, I realized how we just need to continuously pull from vocalists in terms of finding expression and finding meaning behind the sound that we can't layer text on top of as easily. And so there's always been a marriage there for those two things, and I think it's extremely meaningful for me to be able to continue to do both on a regular basis.
Awesome.
Okay, so before I ask the next question, can you go on the weeds a little bit? Like, what were you doing? And like, how did you experiment with that? Because I find that really fascinating.
Yeah, me too. So happy to go into the geeky weeds.
Oh, yeah.
So here's an example. I was singing a late Renaissance piece, and my voice teacher at the time was like, there's some strain happening in your sound, and I think it's manifesting in your tongue tension. Now, when we play trumpet, I feel like, or brass instruments, we talk about articulation a lot, but we don't talk about tongue tension as much. But I realized good articulation is just, the analogy I use is like, it's a flag on a flag post, and the wind is pushing that flag in motion, but it's also making that flag stand parallel to the ground. And if you think of your tongue as that flag just flapping in the wind of your sound production, it's way easier to multiple tongue quickly than trying to muscle each tuka. And so I took the idea of tongue tension, not only in articulation, but also in the shaping of different vowels that you make on a brass instrument. And I started to play around with like loosening the tongue, which naturally adjusted slightly the vowel shape, which definitely adjusted the overtones that can be found in the sound, because I believe that tongue tension and everything connected to the tongue is one of the biggest barriers to making a beautiful sound, in addition to natural support and breath support. So there's one example. You want more?
Well, just to piggyback off of that, like, so what did you do to kind of release tension in your tongue?
So I still do this. I build my warm up around concepts instead of specific studies. So I'll do Chickwitz, for example, but instead of doing Chickwitz and then Clarke and then yada, 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 I'll do Chickwitz, but every day approach it with a different concept. So one day I'll do my Chickwitz and focus just on my tongue and the sensation of my tongue as I play Chickwitz, or I've done a lot of warming up and playing flow studies laying down. And then you naturally have to relax a lot of muscles in the back of your neck and in your back, because gravity is pulling them to relax. And so that also relaxes the muscles around your esophagus and tongue. And so literally that's what I was doing. But then I was also, the next day I would say, well, what if I thought like more of an O vowel while I play my Chickwitz? And then what if as I ascend into the upper register, I thought more like oe? And then the next day it would be like oh, and just adjusting the vowels slightly and thinking about the space in my mouth and how that affects the tone, because we forget that, with singers, the sound bounces around inside your resonating chambers and then comes out your mouth. Well, the sound is doing the same thing when you play a brass instrument. It's mostly bouncing around inside the instrument, but it goes back. There's a standing wave that gets produced that comes back into your facial cavities, and how open you are will affect your the sound production. And so I think a lot about the vowels in terms of sound quality and resonance, and trying to find that really rich overtone sound, but also in efficiency, because when you're ascending or descending through the extremes of the registers, you also want to find a vowel that you can change quickly enough, gradually enough, that you don't hear this major adjustment in your sound as you're playing a scale. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I found that really fascinating, because I think sometimes we, as brass players, we don't really think so much about other factors, or at least that's something that I found just like in my research. We think just so much more like muscle, muscle, muscle. And it's like, that only leads to more tension and a different focus of attention. And so, no, I think it's really cool that you've combined both of these things, and they've helped elevate the singing and the trumpet playing. I think it's really cool.
Absolutely. And if I could just throw in one more conceptual thing that I think I find really helpful is, with singing, you can't really see the mechanism the way we can see our instruments. And so there's a lot more analogy based teachings out there. And so some things that were said to me during a voice lesson was, pretend there's like, I'm doing a visual motion with my thumb, but in the podcast, you'll pretend there's like a beam of beautiful silver light coming out of your forehead, or pretend there's like a dark, rich velvet, chocolatey beam coming out of your chest, and then you project your sound from different parts of your body, or imagine your sound is coming out from behind your back. I find that if you should all go try this. Play a flow studies exercise that you're really comfortable with, and imagine different beams coming out of different parts of your body in different colors and different textures, and even metals or shapes, and see if just imagining those beam analogies will adjust your sound in the quality. Because for me, if I think about sound coming out of my forehead, what it does is naturally release a lot of tension that I think of in the areas that I think of sound production, like my chops or my neck and my body and my shoulders, or if you imagine the sound coming out of, somewhere that's not actually being affected by the tension of your skeletal muscles, it really can have a beautiful effect on your sound. So the more like abstract analogies I found to be really helpful as well.
That's cool. Thank you so much for sharing. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I think that's the same idea, Tyler and I talk about. It's like getting the attention away from here and getting the attention like on the bell, the sound coming out of the bell. I think we talked about that, just not like
it was
we were
like,
just all chatting about stuff.
yeah, it was like this concept of like hearing the sound somewhere else versus like you get caught up here so much, but hearing it out there, or having a focus point, like say, okay, I'm going to play this thing, but keep my focus of attention at the end of the bell and see what that does.
I totally agree. And David Cohen came and worked with my students. He plays in the Milwaukee Symphony, and some kid was playing Mahler 5, and he was just like, imagine your sound is actually coming at you from the back of the hall. We were in a big hall, and I was like, I'm going to steal that for my students, because the more you can get away from like the machine that is your body, the better of a big picture you'll have. And same for golfers. Like, don't overanalyze every part of your swing. Imagine the through line of the ball landing at your target. And just psychological tricks.
Yeah, absolutely. So as the assistant professor of trumpet at University of Wisconsin, what do you look for in a student? And what are some concepts that you emphasize as a teacher? I mean, we just mentioned some right now, but if there's more that come to you, that would be great to share.
So I think, of course, I look for a lot of the stock things that everybody looks for. You're listening for a good sound. You're listening for someone who's interpreted the style. But to me, that's like the basic expectation. What I'm looking for is someone who's willing and excited to merge their music with something else that they're passionate about. Just because I believe so much in the rise of the interdisciplinary arts and in the threading music through not just the musical streams, but if you're going to be someone who's going to bring music to the world, bring it to every part of the world. And a lot of my students are double majors. I have, nuclear engineering, I have Japanese, I have a dance minor, I have etc. And so I'm like, go be an engineer and bring your music to that field. And so I'm looking for people who are curious and creative and excited to build what we call sometimes I call them creative duets, or just weave in two different interests that they have, and they can be two different art forms. Like I had a student write his own trumpet piece and set it to tap dance because he was also a dancer. So he would be tap dancing and accompanying himself playing. Really cool. I had another student who was a beatboxer, and she wrote a piece for trumpet and beatbox. But I've also had students, create. I have a physics major, and he's taking this sonic emissions from distant stars, which are like create these like drone like chordal sounds, but kind of out of tune chords, and he's morphing that into music that he's making. You're both nodding because you're like, that's cool. Yes, the Haydn and Hummel, they're cool, they're beautiful, but that innovative newness, I think, is what's going to push our field into the being safe and exciting and interesting and keep the audiences. And I think I'm looking for people who are going to help bring the field and not allow it to stay in something that I'm worried about, which is the beautiful but not so sought after older art forms. Mm-hmm. And I should preface that by saying I think the major symphony orchestras are going to be fine, but you see the smaller orchestras sort of disintegrating because we're not doing a good enough job of innovating. And I really believe that our field is fine, that the music is not dying. Musical arts are not going away. We just need to do more to meet people and create art that is not only preserving history, but also pushing towards the future and building the new.
Absolutely. That's great. That's a very diverse studio you have.
Yeah, they're awesome. They're such interesting humans.
So, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you mentioned that chamber music is like your favorite genre. So what makes playing chamber music with groups such as Assistant Brass and the Knights so special?
I think there's a lot that makes it special, but autonomy. I really like coming up with ideas, turning them into reality, but I also love working with people and creating a bed of sound, and the richness of harmony is so important, so you have to have multiple people. And also, like we said at first, like when you begin your instrument, it's this like collaborative community experience where it's healthy competition, but also you're going out and making music in the world, and then you're going on these band trips, and like that community cluster is so invaluable to just being a human. And then so if you can pair that element with your creative autonomy and thinking of a way to be innovative and a way to bring new music into the world and a way to preserve old music, you can do all of that in chamber music, but have a stronger creative fingerprint and still keep that community aspect. And so that's why I really love chamber music. And I also just like the beautiful sounds that can be made, and how mobile it is. You can bring it anywhere, whereas in orchestra it's hard to be like, come with me to play this outdoor concert.
Yeah.
So
awesome. So you mentioned earlier that you did obviously you have a singing background, and you actually auditioned for jazz, like jazz vocalists and singing. So, and you've done a lot of projects that have incorporated theater, singing, trumpet dance. I mean, it's like the whole gamut of things. Could you talk about some of those projects, how they came about? Yeah, I just find that, again, really fascinating, because I think what you mentioned earlier, so much of school is focused on you go this way or you go that way. And it's like, here are the two paths that you can go. And it seems like, you know, you're one of those people that's like, no, that's not true. You don't have to do that.
It's true. I think I came to that realization that I don't have to do that later. My whole youth and training was full of stress of spreading myself too thin with too many interests, and then being worried that at some time in the future I'm going to have to pick, I'm air quoting, what I want to be when I grow up. And then ultimately in my late 20s, I was like, oh wait, I am what I want to be when I grow up. It just happens to be these 5 things that I weave together, and that's what I want to be. I don't have to narrow it down. And so, yeah, I mean, I started out huge theater geek in high school, show choir. I mean, I didn't do youth orchestra because I was too busy with show choir. And it's kind of embarrassing to admit now. But I was just really interested in staged storytelling, and theater does a great job at that. I think instrumental recitals, not as much. But that can change, and that is changing. And so when I got to college, I was, double majoring, and I was doing education, but that was, I think my passion for teaching came a little later. I mostly did education to have like a stable, my parents are engineers in the health industry. So I was honestly just worried about getting a job. And I wish I wouldn't have been made fear-based decisions at that point in time. But we can talk more about that later. And I'm extremely grateful for my music ed degree. And so, sorry, tangenting, but getting back to your question, I've always juggled like a lot of different interests, and finally I realized that there was a market for mixing those interests. And it wasn't until I got to my master's, which was at Yale, I realized, oh, I'm a singer. I was actually making my living as a singer, singing in a pseudo professional choir, and then also singing in random services, paid services, and then studying trumpet at Yale, but like just getting way more gigs as a vocalist. And so, but then people were like, oh yeah, that's the girl who does this. And so then I got asked to do more projects where I was in an opera where I was a trumpet player, but also kind of in the opera. We did Purcell's The Fairy Queen, and there was a couple scenes where I was on stage singing. I was a fairy, and then me in my fairy costume went down and tooted the trumpet in the pit, and I started to do more and more of those cross-pollinating type gigs. And then I realized, like, oh, I can curate these as well. So the first big one that I collaborated with a friend on was making a music and cocktails concert happen and series, and where we had a mixologist pair different cocktails with different chamber pieces. And then it was like we had a concert, which of course naturally turned into a party as the night went on, as you're pairing with cocktails. And I was like, oh, this sensory blending thing is really cool. And then I was in New York, and I did a Portrait for the Underdogs concert with my brass quintet at the time, and where we actually interviewed like David Sampson, who wrote Morning Music. We interviewed him, and we made this sort of small mini documentary film on the story behind Morning Music. And it's so powerful to display on a large screen the story behind the piece of music and then immediately play that piece. And so that was like a pairing of music and stories. And we had a trans man share his experience with healthcare and not getting quality experience, and we paired that with another piece. So we had this Portraits of the Underdog, and we just basically talked about, just human experiences, kind of like Humans of New York meets a concert, a brass quintet concert. And then another one was, I was a part of the Lucerne Festival, and this was maybe like the beginning of like I'm a stage performer. I'm a stage storyteller, and I use trumpet and other skills to bring them together. And I know this is kind of a long answer, so I apologize.
Oh,
but
no, go ahead.
But I auditioned for this additional touring dance troupe where they paired 6 chamber musicians with 2 professional dancers, but the chamber musicians each had to go through 6 weeks of intensive dance training. And then we built an hour-long show with 4 movements. By we built, I mean we had a professional choreographer choreograph a piece that was based on an Andy Warhol quote, the 15 minutes of fame theory that basically became real with viral culture. And so I was on stage dancing. It was called Diva Mania, and we're like acting out the diva scene of having that, fighting for that limelight, also playing our instruments, but in motion, and the dancers are interacting with us. And I was like, this is the coolest thing in the entire world. So this is my future. This is what I want to build. And then there's been a series of other little mini projects, but my recent project, which I'm really excited to share about, is a multimedia concert piece based off of my great uncle. His name's Lafcadio O'Hearn. He lived from 1850 to 1904, and he's really the first pseudo-European white man to venture into the East and bring folk and ghost stories from the East to mainstream Western culture. And he's really most famous for translating Japanese ghost stories, but he lived all over. I mean, he was born in Europe and had a ghostly, horrific, tragic life. His life itself was sort of like a horror story. He lived in America and rejected a lot of the anti-misogyny laws, married a black woman in Cincinnati, was fired from all of his jobs because at the time it wasn't legal, and was just like a boundary pusher when it came to like these communities that are not represented in mainstream newspaper and mainstream books. These communities have beautiful spiritual lives that you need to know about, and I'm going to write about them. And so he wrote about voodoo culture. He wrote about he lived in the French West Indies, and he wrote about just all of these beautiful communities that were not a part of mainstream white culture at the time. And this is late 1800s. And then he moved to Japan and, became fascinated by that culture. So the multimedia piece is, we call it part chamber music, part theater, part visual art. We have these beautiful projected art that interacts with the music and interacts with what we're doing on stage. It's a sort of theatrically staged work, but that's 45 to 50 minutes long. So we're moving around the stage, playing our instruments. The movement has meaning. Some of the instruments are actually characters, like the snare drum has different lights and we interact with it. And it's essentially a portal that, wow, I'm really going like into a deep tangent, so I hope you're having fun.
Oh, no.
No, this is cool.
Yeah, but the snare drum is like a portal between the dividing line between our real physical world and then our supernatural worlds where the ghosts and the spirits and like our spiritual religious beliefs live. And the snare drum is like the dividing line between those. So when we interact with the snare drum, we're essentially like reaching our arm into the ghost world and trying to like pulling back, ghosts that Lafcadio wrote about into this space and then interacting them with sound and light. And so it's like, I love, first of all, bringing a part of my family history onto the stage, but also sharing his cool, wicked, kind of gruesome and eerie stories and art with audiences and turning it into music. And so I work with composer Maria Finkelmeyer at MF Dynamics, and we actually just produced a film that's a 27-minute long film, and we've been so honored. It's been very successful in the film festival arena, and it's basically the COVID-19 version of the live performance art piece, but in film version. It can be enjoyed at home, without being near people. And it's basically it's like 8 scenes that I am the main character, and I go through this sort of like post-life transition that gets more and more deep into the supernatural space, and weird things are happening around me and to me. And we use the music from the performance art piece, which we also just recorded into an album, which is coming out in September. And so that's just like a deep dive overlay of what I'm interested in. And I feel like anybody who's listening to this either like checked out 5 minutes ago or they're super invested, because I think like if you just want to play Mahler 5 in pictures, um, there are so many there's so many other people who want to just geek out about those things with you. But like for me, this stuff, as you can tell, I'm really excited about it. It ties in all the questions that you have, because I'm like, these are the students I want who want to build cool things. And yes, it doesn't need to be a large scale film or multimedia project, but just do something that tells a story that is innovative, that uses the new sonic palette that we have now with the technological instruments, and the new software programs, and just like do something different and cool and tell a story while you're doing it, because the storytelling arts are still thriving and well, and that's how we can preserve and continue to grow our art form. So I'm gonna drink some coffee and and sorry, I apologize for the long-winded answer.
No, that's great. So I'm curious. So if I'm certainly interested, one of those people who would be interested in that, like where, if I wanted to watch that performance or, see it live at some point, like where could I do that? Where could I find that film?
Awesome question. So the film will most likely be dropped with the album, which we are looking at we believe a September 24th release date. So this fall, we're it's sort of like an eerie art film with elements of horror and ghost woven in, and so we're aiming for the Halloween fall, coming of the dark time, and we're probably going to open up the film to the public for about 2 months. Some film festivals do require that they have the premiere status in their location, so we can't make it abundantly public for a long period of time. We can't just throw it on YouTube. So we are going to, as we drop the album, release the film. The performance art piece, the pandemic kind of slaughtered what the goals were with that. We're hoping to do a Chicago, Cincinnati, Wisconsin tour of that once we revamp a few things in 2022, 23. But definitely going to try to bring it to Boston, definitely going to try to bring it to Japan. I will let you know. I'll put you on my list of people to tell, because I think it's going to be cool, and I want all your listeners to come see it.
That's really, really cool.
Yeah, right. I'm just thinking like those rehearsals must be so like exhausting, but also at the same time too, like the creativity has to be like out the roof, because you're analyzing and viewing so many different disciplines and then trying to weave them together, like having the vision, having the ideas, and then tweaking and this and that. I mean, it's really inspiring, honestly, to hear that, because like you said, the things that you're doing now, you're following these passions that you have, and then like seeing it through, and then you're like being rewarded with like these opportunities to like display that. So it's really cool.
Yeah, and I'll say, just to like make this a little bit more bite-sizable, if you're interested in this kind of stuff but have no idea how to start in your recitals. So build a recital. If you play trumpet, build a trumpet recital, play the pieces you want to play, and just do one piece that has a cool interdisciplinary element to it. And, get a dancer friend to come and dance to the Peasley Night Songs. And because that's a beautiful, motionful piece. And just start there. And then when you start interacting with other artists, they bring their creativity. And honestly, the rehearsals are a pretty organic process. They can be crunchy in some ways, where it's like sometimes there's too many creative ideas that you need to kind of chip away at the iceberg. And I think that's whoever's the leader, the visionary, you have to like come with a solid vision. And I have made the mistake of not doing that in the past. And so it's like, all right, here is my general vision, and here are 5 things I want to manifest out of this vision. These 5 things are crucial, and there are North Star. Now take your art that you specialize in and help me make that happen. And then giving artists a lot of autonomy based off of your very clear, strong, but open vision. I think that sets up really beautiful collaborative processes, and it can be small, like a piece on a recital. I'm playing this piece. You're a digital art you're a pixel artist or pixel pusher, some people call them. Can you make something that projects on the wall while I play this? I want it to represent these three things. And you can do that just by looking around you and seeing what kind of artists are in your neighborhood or in your communities. Just start small, and then you could build maybe a whole recital based off of something that worked. And then, before you know it, like, you can get major grants for interdisciplinary arts. And you just, like, I started in my senior recital. I had my a cappella group sing, and I had a dancer, and I had a choir, and I sang the second movement of the Haydn. Like, I started doing weird, odd, eccentric things like that, and then that's what people liked. You put yourself on a limb by taking a risk and being like, people might think this is so stupid. Chances of people thinking it's stupid are really small. And the people who think it's stupid are the people who are actually the most insecure themselves. And so, feel stupid, feel vulnerable, but do one thing that's a little bit goofy and different, and then I think you might be surprised the kind of people you attract.
Yeah, I think, like, from my own personal experience, I feel like in recitals that I've done, where I've done some pieces that are outside the trumpet canon and they're a little more eccentric, that's typically when I get, like, the best response from the audience, either in applause or after the recital's over. People say, "Oh, that was a really cool piece." So I mean, there's definitely something true to that. I think, as you said, like, if you want to play pictures in Mahler 5, that's cool. But I think that kind of keep our art form relevant, it's important to kind of, like, all right, I think we need to be pushing more into, like, this area of what we do and expanding what we do. So I completely agree with you. I think that's really, really cool with the projects that you've done. And speaking of that, granted, I think I know the answer to this. Like, what keeps you motivated and continuing to, like, be this innovator of these different projects and, pulling from all these different art forms?
I think so. We have intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation, and it's a combination of those two things, because intrinsically, walking my dog and thinking, like, oh, what kind of cool recital do I want to do? Like, here's one thing I was just thinking is I'm a rock climber, and I love hiking and climbing. I was like, I'm going to ascend a mountain, get a drone artist to come with me, and maybe a percussionist, maybe play, I don't know, some smaller drum that they can come up a mountain with us. And then I'm going to have a composer write a series of fanfares that we're going to play from the top of the mountain, because I like climbing, I like trumpet, let's smash them together and let's go, And so thinking about those ideas give me energy. It provides intrinsic motivation. But the doing of those things and all the logistical steps, yeah, those drain energy for sure. To build a film, oh my goodness, I had no idea. I have so much respect for the film industry now that I've gone through the process. And it's draining to figure out, what are we wearing? What's the costume budget? Is there a costume budget? What are we doing for makeup? And all the little details. But I think when you have the intrinsic motivation and then you actually set it in motion, meaning you have to have a date. You have to get your people and get your date and say, this is happening, and make it a event page somewhere and say, hey, world, this is happening. Then you have the, oh crap moment of, like, I have to make it happen. And so to me, I would like to say that I'm purely intrinsically motivated. No, I have to have that deadline looming and be like, oh, well, no, I have to do it. And so I make sure to set the date and get the people. So, like, there's an investment there from others. So I look bad if I don't do it. That's how I actually make it come from mind to reality. And I think that's, lots of things can get lost and stuck in the mind spot and just, like, talking about it, but not actually doing it. So you got to find an accountability buddy.
Yeah. So with all the projects that you do and everything, how do you maintain that balance between work and your life? And it seems like they almost kind of bleed together at certain points, but do you get to a point where you just try to shut everything off that you do musically, career-wise, and just kind of, like, get away from it all? Like, how do you find balance?
It's a really good question. I think that's the hardest question that you're going to ask today. And I think it's something that we artists, musicians, probably are the worst at. I'm sure I'm not alone. And maybe I want to ask you guys the same question, because I'm still growing in this area. But I think for me, I work like a dog. I work so hard. And I only recently, in the past few years, have been like, all right, I need this much sleep. Like, let's not slowly disintegrate my health. So then you start layering just your basic needs, and then start layering thin layers of your boundaries for those basic needs over time. And so sleep, I need sleep. If I'm eating like absolute crap all the time because I only have time to grab fast food, that I will feel awful. And so what I do, because work and play for us musicians they're so blended together, right? I basically assign myself like a 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. the work I'm gonna do, and then I think we all experience where like that work bleeds into our evening, and then but then at a certain point I'm like, all right, now I'm done with work, and I do some sort of ritual. Maybe it's have a decaf coffee, maybe it's like have dinner or do something that feels a little bit like a low energy, and then I'll start my playtime, which is still work, right? It's still, I'm practicing at night or I'm doing something that is for my job, but I'm just deciding to label it differently. Like now I get to practice. Because if I were if I were an accountant, I would probably still come home at night and practice because it's fun and meaningful to me. And so I just end up putting these arbitrary definitions on like, now I'm transitioning into my evening playtime, even though it's still work. And that's what helps me build boundaries. But I do think it's really important because I know a lot of people have really struggled with mental health because they don't set any sort of boundaries for themselves. So what do you guys do? I mean, help me help myself.
Ali, you want to take this one?
I can try. I think finding interests outside of playing has been really beneficial for me. So I got into running probably about 6 years ago. And that has kind of led me into like half marathons, did an ultra marathon. And then now it's like transitioning into triathlon. So now I'm like training for a half Ironman. So it's like, I'm finding these other interests. I mean, the disciplines kind of align, but it's so fascinating, like learning about all these pro athletes that I follow now, and they post a lot of stuff on YouTube. So it's like kind of following them, their training, the discipline itself that I really like. And then I'm also getting plugged into the communities that are associated, like running clubs or like triathlon clubs. And so that's kind of been cool. Honestly, the hardest thing for me is maybe not so much the doing, but the thinking of the act. That's what I'm struggling with the most, is just like shutting it off in my head.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, sometimes it is like letting that loop kind of play itself out. Like if I'm on a ride or on a run, sometimes going for walks help. But I feel like for me, the hardest thing is like getting it out of my head to stop thinking about work or stop thinking about trumpet or whatever else. So that is a work in progress. And that's something that I've always struggled with, because it's like if it's not working, like I kind of try to force it to make it happen instead of like shutting it off and just being like, all right, it's done. Like I have a really hard time doing that because I'm like to take control and stuff. So
For sure.
I don't know. Yeah, for me, long story short, finding other things that you enjoy doing outside of it to kind of create more balance, I suppose.
Yeah, I think I'm the same way. I'm also really into like fitness. So that's become like my thing. That's how I get away from work or thinking about trumpet. Just like go lift weights. Because then like it's kind of hard to really focus on music because like you're literally focusing on your form or lifting and the struggles that go with that. So that's kind of like what I do. And like after work, you teach all day, and you practice in the morning, you try to find some practice times throughout the day. So when I get home in the evening, usually if I get home at like 6, I'm shutting my brain off for this hour from 6 to 7. I'm just going to like sit on a couch, watch like something funny, something really light on TV, and I'm just gonna just like sit here for an hour and do nothing, so my body can recover physically and mentally. And then I'll eat dinner, or maybe if I need to practice something, if I have an upcoming performance, I'll do that. But yeah, I need that time of just like a dead period. Is what I like to call it. It's like do nothing. I want to be like turn my brain off literally for just like an hour so I can just recover from a day of work essentially. So that's what I try to do. I think we all, everyone has those days where it's yeah, I'm really successful at doing that, and there's other times when it's like yeah, it's not. And as a teacher, I'm sure like there's certain times of the year when it's like almost impossible to do that. Like near the end of a semester or the beginning of a semester where it's like really, really crazy. So yeah, definitely. So that's kind of what I do, more or less.
I think it's really cool, and it relates to the question you asked earlier about singing and trumpet playing. We can find a connection from our work as brass players into other areas so easily. And I also have gone through, training for halves and marathons, and currently just started training for a half again. And then also I mentioned I rock climb, and
Yeah.
and I find there's such a benefit to doing those things. And for me, rock climbing, you have to be in the moment. Like even though you're completely locked in with ropes and a pulley system, your body doesn't know that. You do feel like you might fall and die. And so like grabbing that next hold has there's an importance to it, even if your mind knows that you're safe. So there's like this in the moment hyper focus, which I think strongly benefits performance and the performance practice techniques. And then for me, running, in sort running these long distances and doing these long training days. I do the Hal Higdon method for my training, and
Okay.
I like if I have 2 hours on my feet, that's when those creative juices can really flow. So I invite work in, as long as I feel like it's not a bad loop. I have to ask myself, is this thought loop, is it draining me of energy or is it giving me inspiration? There's a really great, if you like podcasts, Pete Kadushin he's a professional performance trainer, and he's works with the Chicago Blackhawks, and he's the mental performance coach for them. But he also interviews musicians and talks about the connection between athletics and sports and performing music. And I think it's just endlessly fascinating to build those connections. And also, I got a dog during the pandemic. That's been a really great way of
Yeah.
wow, trumpet's important, but I need to keep this thing alive. And like when I'm walking her, I think that I'm going to be able to think about work and like build solutions to problems, but really she's like biting her leash or chewing up my neighbor's new flowers, and you're like, she pulls you into the moment a lot, and that's been really helpful to have.
Nice.
I do have another question. You mentioned this earlier about making decisions due to fear, because obviously that was some of your experience, deciding to do choral music ed, because you were afraid that, hey, I may not have a job once I'm done with undergrad. And I did music ed as an undergraduate too, for very similar reasons, because I was like, well, I want to make sure I can get that job. Your parents like, you want to make sure you can get that job after, just in case, you never know. So I wonder if you can talk a little more about that idea of like making these decisions or life decisions based on fear.
Yeah, it's such a good question, and I feel like also really hard to find the balance between being practical or making fear-based decisions, being scared. And it's really hard to know where that gray area ends and where there's a solid line. But I think it comes down to the why factor. This is my philosophy on any philosophy, which is, let's say you have a different political view than I do. I can jive with anybody who has a different opinion than me as long as they've asked the word why as many times as I have. So if you say, I believe this because my mom said to, and that's done, then you're not asking, well, why do I believe this? And what's the deeper layer there? And then why do I believe that? And what question can spark from that layer? And then how do we dig deeper and deeper? And so I think when it comes to making a big decision, you have to ask, well, why am I leaning towards music ed? Am I leaning towards music ed because I want that job? I want that security? Well, why do I feel insecure? And for me, in actually doing the music ed degree, I feel like I loved half of it and didn't like the other half. So then I wish I would have asked myself, well, why am I feeling these contradictory feelings? Because part of me felt like it was just, it was taking up so much time when I should have been practicing. And I didn't actually enjoy going into the public schools at the time. And because it just felt like I wanted to use that time to increase my artistic skill and ability. And that's sad to admit out loud in public because actually when I became a teacher, I loved the job. And then there was the other part of the degree, and the reason why I loved my job as an elementary music teacher is because I'm fascinated with human growth and development. And I wish I would have recognized that in undergrad. Be like, you love this class because it's a psych-based education class. You don't love, I don't love like teaching beginner clarinet. Not only am I not good at it, not only can I not play the clarinet, but like it's just not my thing. But I love watching a human hold a clarinet, make a sound, ask themselves questions, grow, and like experience growth using this vehicle, which is the clarinet in this analogy. And so by asking why, what I would have discovered is I like psychology and human growth and development. So that would have pushed me towards another major, a major in trumpet performance and psychology. And I think that would have been a more true double major for me. But when I got my teaching job, which I was extremely grateful to have in the recession of 2008, 2009, I fell in love with the job because I could say, all right, my job is to teach elementary music, but I am teaching children how to develop and grow socially, mentally, intellectually, musically, and expressively through the lens of music, but music is the means to the end. And when I started doing that, I was like, I love this. I love working with children. They're 10 times more expressive than the average college trumpet major. When you play Tchaikovsky, they dance. Yeah. And when I hear Swan Lake excerpt, it's like trying to be too correct. And so going back to the fear-based thing, I think it's okay to have fear, obviously, but you have to ask yourself why. And if you're getting pressure from your parents, try to figure out, like, all right, am I really doing this because my parents want me to and that's it? Or are there elements in this that I also believe? And I think fear usually means that there's something that there's an idea that you haven't fully explored underneath the stone of fear. And I think it's really important to dig under that and then find your like true North Star beneath the fear. And I guess other times I've made fear-based decisions, it's because of a scarcity mindset. It's like, if I don't do this, I won't have this. And that's just not true. You can all you need to thrive in this world is your mental health, your physical health, and the ability to problem solve. If you have those three things, you're going to be fine. So let yourself stumble. Let yourself major in just music and be okay with that fear. And then if you have then you could go to grad school, or if you don't want to go into debt, then get that double major and have that security and say, I'm doing this, but I'm doing it for the right reasons. I'm going to pick a double major that's important to me and not one that just feels like it's secure. So another long-winded answer, but one I'm extremely passionate about. And so I feel like, yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think about the fear-based decision-making?
So I actually just shared this story with a few of my students, like maybe 2 days ago. Something I haven't really talked about, but after I graduated with my doctorate, obviously, you're applying for jobs, you're applying for everything, just hoping you get a bite. And so I applied for this job. Actually, Tyler, you know this story because you told me about the job. So there's the school in the Atlanta area that I applied for the job, and I was offered the job. I didn't have any at the time. I didn't have any offers for anything else, and it was like this summer after I graduated. But and it's something Tyler and I always talk about, like the why. So it's funny that you brought that word up because we talk about that part almost every episode. And I asked myself, like, why do I want this job? Do I want this job to make an impact with the students, or do I want this job because it's in a certain market? I can, freelance, I can do all these other things. And I just kind of came to the conclusion that, I'm doing this because I may not have a job that's guaranteed, and all the reasons why I would want to take the job was outside of the actual job. They're based on other opportunities that would potentially benefit me. And I was like, I don't think that would serve the students well. Like, I would be doing them a disservice. So, kind of like I tell my students, sometimes you kind of have to bet on yourself. So I decided not to take that job, even though I didn't have any other offers at the time. And, lo and behold, like a few weeks later, I applied for another job, something that I would actually like to do, and was able to get that job. But I would have never gotten that opportunity had I just like, yeah, I'll take this opportunity. And it was, fear, but I decided not to kind of go into that. So yeah.
I like that. Yeah. So when I was an undergrad, I went to performing arts schools for middle school and high school, which has its pluses and minuses because you're kind of pushed to go in this direction. And, you didn't really get a kind of like holistic high school experience. We didn't have sports teams. We didn't have any of that. It was, this is what you're doing. And so during my undergrad, I was like completely lost because I too had this passion because I had jazz influence and classical, but I remember when I came in and I auditioned for both and I was going to do the double major and somebody was like, yeah, you can't do that. Like only one person has ever done that. And I was like, this is what I want to do. Like I want to work on both disciplines because they're part of my life and stuff. And so I ended up was a jazz major, then dropped it, was a classical major, dropped it, and then went like just a Bachelor of Arts in Music. And then I took like a bunch of management and leadership classes at Florida State and like took some other courses like psychology and stuff. And I was like, oh, this is cool. I'm like learning about business, learning about whatever. And then I kind of got to like play in the ensembles I wanted to versus like, oh, you have to play in this ensemble to get these degree credits or whatever. So when I was done, I knew I wanted to freelance. And I spent like 5 years freelancing. And then I went back to grad school because I knew what I wanted to do at the time. I was like, okay, I want to come back and I want to prepare better for like military band auditions. And I feel like having that and understanding why you're going back to school and what you're doing and this and that, like, I feel like I squeezed everything out of my master's degree. And it was like so purposeful and so driven. Like I had that vision. I knew exactly what I was coming into. And I think also having that experience, like not going straight through to the degrees helped as well versus like my undergrad where I was just like I had no direction really, and seeing that shift, those two experiences definitely gave me a lot of clarity and like understanding how important it is to know your why and how that can lead you moving forward. So yeah, that was just kind of like an experience that I had with that.
100%. And I think you both mentioned like how knowing your why affected how you used your time and your decision making. And I think one huge mistake we make as a society is asking the question from like preschool on, what do you want to be when you grow up? I think that implies that there's an answer and that there's like a finite answer that you have to clarify like a one word response. And that's absolutely that question did some damage because I was like, well, I want to be 5 different things and I want to make them smash them all together. And if you're a kid and you say that, like, oh, that's cute, but then when you're an adult and they say like oh, honey, you're like, no. And it's like, well, watch me go do it anyways. And I think not asking what do you want to be when you grow up, but how is it important for you to spend your time? For me, not only how do I want to spend my time, like what activities do I want to put into my time, but also what does the structure of my time look like? So for me, I'm like half my week, I need it to be structured. I need that structural balance. And then I need plenty of space and time to be creative and expressive and kind of think, and build these projects. And so when I was in Boston, I was a teaching artist. which is basically like a hybrid between a teacher and a performer, where they expect you to go out and be a performer and bring what you learned from the professional realm and bring it into communities and public schools. So as a teaching artist, I was expected to be there at school like 3 days a week, but I had sort of a lot of leeway to leave if I had a gig. And then, so I had 3 days a week of structure and then teaching, and then plenty of time to go tour with Seraph Brass and to kind of go be my musician self. And I could do that job, but I could also be a professor. And I'm spending my time the same way, partly structured, partly creative in project building. And as long as you know how to spend your time and how you want to break it down, there's infinite job descriptions that you can put in that time structure. And then that allows for less fear, because you have more satisfaction in knowing that I could spend my time in these 20 different ways, instead of saying I have to be an orchestral musician or a military band musician or a professor, because those are the only 3 ways to get a steady job in music. That is fear-based, and that's not true. And so I think defining how you want to spend your time is so incredibly important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's great. Thank you so much for all the insight. I mean, I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, no, it's great, because it's like the conversations that JV and I have. This is like exactly the kind of stuff that we would talk about. And it's like, for me, I leave this conversation feeling like pumped and like fired up, and that's how I know it's like, okay, this was like a really good, inspiring, and not inspiring like motivation fleeting, but just like, yeah, like you hear stuff like this and it gets you going. Like it's exciting.
Yeah, there's like a wholesomeness to talking about our field, but also like looking forward and backwards, like looking backwards and being like, how did I arrive here, and what are the pros, what are the good things and bad things that happened, and what would I do differently? But then what are we looking towards in the future? I know I talked a lot, but like I'm so curious to hear. I love hearing your answers, and what, like, do you mind if I ask you some questions? Is that okay?
Sure.
You can stop the podcast if you want. But I'm curious to hear, like, if you went through any sort of major turning points in your careers or life, and like if you could go back and tell your 18-year-old self something, what would it be?
Oh, I got an answer right away.
Go ahead.
I would have not gone straight into college from high school. I think I would have benefited from taking like a year off and just kind of, because again, I went through that art school process. I know, Javen, you went through one too, but it was like every single day you had after school rehearsal and stuff. And it was like, I remember my senior year, I was like, I don't want to do youth symphony. I was like, because I wanted to watch, I'm from Jacksonville, Florida originally. And I was like, I just wanted to watch a football game with my dad. And just like, I didn't want to go on this rehearsal because I didn't like the stuffiness of an orchestra at the time. And I was just like, I don't want to do this. And yeah, I would have definitely taken a year off and just allowed myself to like ask like what I actually enjoy doing and what I like doing. That's just one that came to my head right away,
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah.
I think for me, a turning point, that's a good question. I think a turning point for me was, so my first year of my doctorate, I went through a very traumatic experience, dealing with just like some playing issues and just like mental health issues. And I think, getting on the other side of all that, that made me reevaluate a lot of things. I reshaped my body. I went through a major weight loss, got fit, kind of got my chops back in order eventually, maybe a year after that. And that experience taught me so much about myself, about how to be a better teacher if that were to happen in the future for me. How to be, how to balance my time, and certain, like making sure I put values on certain things in my life, and the people I'm around or people I associate with. So I think that was a turning point for me. I think that really shaped how I teach today, how I am just with people in general, and how I'm able to, hopefully connect with students and empathize with different experiences. So to me, I think that was like that year was a big turning point. Yeah.
For sure. And I think what's really cool to hear is when, yeah, I guess when you build in reflection to your life. And I'm also a queen of the victory lap. I didn't do an extra year after high school. I really also wish I would have. But I did a fifth year of college to finish the double major. I did an artist diploma at Yale. And I did the Carnegie Hall Chamber Music Ensemble Connect program. And I stayed in New York to freelance for an extra year, an extra third year. And so building in an extra year of reflection after each one of these sort of milestone experiences, I noticed I got infinitely better at my craft, not during the learning process, but actually in the year after. Because there's a certain period of time that I need to absorb things. And I think building in reflective moments, whether they're micro or macro, a full year or even just like a day, like 2 days a month to be able to check in with yourself. How am I doing? Like, how am I really doing? Am I okay? Is this process working for me? And I wish we built in reflection into our culture and communities way more. And I want somebody out there to also make a post high school internship for people where you're allowed to go around and you're on rotation where you shadow different jobs for an entire year. For you spend like 1 or 2 months shadowing different jobs where you get to actually learn what it means to sit in that seat before you go to college. I mean, we'd save so much money. We'd save so much time just letting high school kids not go straight to college. And college is so expensive now that I feel like that program needs to be built if it's not already in existence.
Yeah, I agree. We need a lobby for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do we do that?
Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah. I read this book called Late Bloomers not too long ago, and it talked about like our country's obsession with like early achievers and them having success like right away, and the amount of money that's spent on like essentially grooming these kids to go attend these Ivy League or like, top tier schools, and what that does to them, from a mental health standpoint, also to the parents, this and that. And it's just, my wife and I were actually about to have our firstborn next month in a few weeks, actually.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And so like, we talk about it all the time. We're like, we're going to allow them to here's kind of a buffet of things that you can go try to do, see what sticks, see what doesn't, but let them kind of drive that passion instead of like us driving that for them. Because my wife, she's also a musician. She's a flute player, went through like the schooling and all that stuff. And it's like we both have had those experiences of just like burnout, and just like it's like playing an instrument, it shifts. Like when you're a kid, it's like, oh, this is cool, this is fun. And then something changes. It's like when you get to like the college level and you're like, oh, this is a mechanical thing to provide income, this and that. And it's like that love, again, it becomes like fear-based type of mentality. And we don't want to like preach that or like push that on our son. So
yeah. And I was recently talking to somebody who is a therapist, and they were talking about how with children, we start them young. We're like, you are smart, you are beautiful, you are funny. And there's like, it's putting a billboard on this thing that's supposed to be a process. And so, talking to ourselves the way we should be talking to kids, which is another reason I'm grateful for my music ed degree. Like, you are in the process of figuring this out. You are able to problem solve. And do you see how good you did today? You did a great job problem solving today. Like, praising the process instead of the results is something that like I wish I would have done for myself starting way younger. And even now, I try to be like, you are able to readapt and develop in this new environment. You just take some time and you're within that process. And I think giving ourselves that grace is so important. And it's all in the child psychology books, but like we should do it in our adult psychology as well.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I agree. Yeah. I listen to a lot of sports psychologists, and they're all about process over results, because especially for like professional or even college team is, they spend so many hours doing certain drills or what have you, so that they're so focused on, especially like someone like Nick Saban, who's Alabama coach. He's notorious for talking about the process. Like, the result is completely irrelevant. We focus on the process, we'll get the result, but that's where everything needs to be about the process. So,
For sure. And like, the result is just a data point that's within a larger structure of the process.
right.
And I I don't know if you guys feel this way, but um I when I was younger, each concert mattered so much. And one time I had the opportunity to play Mahler 5, and the whole experience went well, except for I chipped like the first high A. And it's like I've been training my whole life to do this. Blah, 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 blah. If I could have like kicked my instrument, drop kicked it, I would have done that at that point. And I think, because I put so much weight on this single performance, but now that I tour with Seraph Brass and we do 60 concerts a year, it's like every little chip, note, and mistake doesn't matter. It's like, oh, well, I'll try to pick that up tomorrow. And so I wish I would have put so much less weight on this individual performances. And yes, if you're only doing one performance of Petrushka, you might leave some brown notes on the stage, and like you just have to tell yourself, I will probably get another opportunity to perform this piece, or I'll perform another big exposed piece in my life, and like, what did I learn from this? And so the process really is something that I think we mistrain, especially in classical music. It's so much about reproducing sameness instead of reproducing expression that is not fear-based.
Yep, that's I'm actually working with Jan Kagaris right now, and so
Cool.
she's talking about all that kind of stuff because I've been dealing with like a nerve injury in my lip, and so we're doing these exercises, and she's like, "Are you a perfectionist?" And I was like, "Yeah," and she's like, "Yeah, you need to learn how to like get that monkey off your shoulder." And she was telling me the story. She was playing, and she missed one note like at the end of an etude, and she went back and played the whole thing down again, and her teacher was just like, "Yeah, that doesn't impress me." And basically it was just like, you can play something that has 100 notes and you miss one, and it's like you think about the one note that you miss and not the all the other stuff, and it's like, why? And it's like the same thing for me. It's like I can sit there and think about, oh, that one chipped note, but it's like, man, what about all the other good stuff that happened? Again, that's something that like can get built in, especially like taking auditions and this and that. It's like, oh, that note was off that note, and that you just like can get in that mindset and live there, and it can become very toxic after a while.
So toxic and so dangerous.
Yeah.
Not only for your playing and your music making, but for your mental health. I know, because I went down that path. And like, my worth was based on the number of notes I got right. It was so sad. It's so sad. And it was not a good space to be in.
Yeah.
Ugh. Yeah, well, I mean, that's really interesting. And I feel like I really am interested in the injury that you're having, but maybe that's another conversation.
Yeah, we could chat more after the interview if you want. Yeah, because it's totally like changed so much. And this, I feel like what you talked about, like a turning point. Like I had one like 6 years ago with like health and fitness and like, all that kind of stuff. And then now it's like, I've only been in this job for like over a year. And so it's like, oh, this was quote unquote my dream job type of thing. And then here I am feeling like I have to like fight for it almost, like with the recovery. But in terms of like pedagogy and how I approach brass playing and everything, it's kind of like everything I've thought before is kind of getting thrown out, which is why I was so curious about like the singing, because she has us doing a lot of singing and exercises that like relax tension in the tongue and like all these kind of things. So it's like, oh, this is really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I actually recently worked with a speech pathologist, and fascinating stuff where part of you build in some exercises that it's basically like raspberries, like I'll be playing my morning warm up and then I'll be like, and it's actually really helpful. And another great thing to explore, speech pathology, physical therapy, etc., has been so helpful for me. And I also had an injury when I left Northwestern, I couldn't even play a major scale. I spent a year and a half super injured, not able to really play outside the staff. Took 2 years to build back. The first time I played for 15 minutes straight after I graduated from Northwestern was in my Yale audition. Like I was playing small baby chunks for an entire year and a half. Like I'm talking like 5-note scales. Relearning how to enter, how to enter a practice session and put the trumpet on my face, starting from scratch. And man, it builds so much more than resilience. It builds an adult's approach to a beginner's entry point. And as a teacher, that's invaluable, I think. But also as an adult who, like, now you can solve any problem from the ground up, which I think is really cool.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we should talk after this.
We should talk.
That's where I'm at right now.
A 2-hour conversation.
Yeah, we should talk because through this process, I've been able to talk to a lot of people that have gone through this. But then, some people, it's like what you're going through right now is what you went through kind of sounds like my process, where it's like Jan will just be like, the body will figure it out. And it's like, it just takes time. And I'm like, why is my body so, you start getting down on yourself about like what you could do, but then you're like, but really that wasn't efficient because that led to injury and then this and that. And, yeah, we'll definitely chat after this because it's good for me, it's like healing to talk to other people about it. So
for sure.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for talking to us. This has been an amazing conversation with you today. But before we wrap up, we kind of like to end on a fun little segment called "What Are You Listening To?" So this could be anything. It could be classical, it could be R&B, it could be country, whatever, jazz. So are you listening to anything, any new music? It can be old music, classical, anything.
Yes, there's a hip hop artist based in Israel named, I hope I say it correctly, Noga Erez, Nogaerez. I don't know if you've heard of her.
I could write that down.
Her stuff is so cool. I've also been listening to Bon Iver and Billie Eilish a lot. And the last thing on my dock was Andy Akiho. He wrote a piece for trumpet, steel pan, and violin called A Ray's End. But I mean, I just went through a big Caroline Shaw phase, and now I'm putting Andy Akiho. I'm trying to find interesting, cool composers. Gabriella Smith is another one. I just listened to Blueprinting by the Azuri Quartet, and trying to find like how we can merge this sort of new hip hop trend that Billie Eilish she's a groundbreaker in, where it's like very calm hip hop with very strong contrasts, mixing that with sort of contemporary urban classical. I think that there's a lot of really exciting, possible, innovative sounds. I also started writing my own music recently.
Nice.
Haven't brought anything yet, but trying to learn from all these amazing people and see what happens.
We'll be on the lookout for that.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, as soon as I say that, I got to follow through with it, which is good. Got to get that extrinsic motivation.
That's right.
Tyler, what are you listening to?
So there's this rapper. He's originally out of Charlotte, and then I was doing some research on him. His name is Lute, Lute. His real name is Luther, but he's actually signed on J. Cole's album. Oh. And but I was listening to him, and it sounded like actual drum set, and then like actual musicians playing. It wasn't like synth or any of that stuff, but it was like really simple bass line, simple harmonies, just a few different chords. But his rapping style was like, oh, he kind of sounds like Common. So I went and then listened back to Common again. And then from Common, then I went back to like Dwele, and it's like, oh, wow, like this is cool because I haven't like listened to them in a while. But yeah, I love when that happens. So like you listen to somebody and you're like, oh man, it sounds like this person. Because, growing up in jazz, like you can hear that lineage of like, oh, who these people kind of listened to and studied. And it's cool to be able to do that. For me, I feel like I'm a beginner in that with like hip hop and stuff, like tracing all that those kinds of things. But yeah, that was kind of cool. So yeah, Lute, Lute is his rapper name. But yeah, he seems pretty young too, like in his 20s.
Awesome. Well, I'm listening to at least this past week, Jordan Rocky. He's a New Zealand, Australian musician. I think he's based in London though. It's kind of like fusion, I guess, like your artist. It's a fusion like R&B, hip hop, or pop. He's a great musician. He just released a new album maybe a few months ago called Late Night Tales. But he also, if you want to check out some of his live stuff, he did one of the NPR Tiny Desk concerts.
Oh, nice.
So you can check that out. He's on there too. He's great voice, great singer. His music is definitely box. It's a vibe. It's a vibe. And also I think I mentioned this group in another episode. Phony People. They just released a new album. That's Phony, PHONY People, just PPL. For anybody who's curious, they're a hip hop group out of I think Brooklyn or Queens. I think it's Brooklyn. And they've done Tiny Desk as well. If you want to check out some of their older stuff, but they just released a new album maybe like a month ago. That's really good. So that's what I've been listening to. So we want to thank Ms. Jean Laurenz again for joining us. This has been a great conversation. We really, really enjoy it. At least I think I can speak for Tyler on that. And we hope you all enjoy it. Before we wrap up, Jean, if people want to like follow you and read more about you and see what the kind of projects you're working on, where can they find you?
They can find me. My website is just jeanlaurenz.com. And also my Instagram handle is @JeanLaurenz. And I tend to put a lot of trumpet-based stuff, some trumpet practice tips, mixed in with some vocals, mixed in with a lot of dog pictures. So you'll get the whole gamut if you want to find the Instagram handle or the website.
Yeah, I think I saw like the little clips from your projects that I looked at your website, sorry. I saw like clips from the videos, the projects that you mentioned earlier. They look really, really cool. I definitely have to check those out. And you said September 24th is about what you're aiming for, right?
Yeah, for the release, yeah. And I can send you the trailer to the film if you're interested. It's
awesome. Yeah,
10 seconds.
Yeah, we can definitely post that. Awesome. So please subscribe to Coffee and Clark's on Instagram and on YouTube and on our Apple Podcast account. Subscribe, give us 5 stars, share with your friends, all those great things. If you're a music educator, use this as much as you want. Send it to your band directors, your music teachers all over the country. So we want to thank you all for listening in, and we hope to have new episodes very soon. See you next time.